Grateful to God for what's already been done in this space and for what God is going to do beyond this moment. I'm beginning this morning one final series that I think is going to be important for not just the church, but I believe it is important for the purposes of just where we are as a society. And right now, we are in a society that lacks an understanding about who they are. And I'm not talking about jobs, I'm not talking about economics, I'm not talking about political affiliation, none of that. Because here's the truth. If you're going to deal with all that stuff, you first got to still deal with the human being. So the series title is one simple word: made. And this morning I want to talk about the product of a perfect blueprint. The product of a perfect blueprint. I looked at myself this morning. And when I looked at myself this morning, I said, you know what? It's a good-looking black man in that mirror. And I thought that way so much that I looked at myself and I was like, you know what? Let me go see my wife before I leave. I'm gonna tap. And I said, hey, what you think? And she's just like, huh. And then the real question I asked, like, now if I see you somewhere, can I holler at you? She's like, sure enough. And I said to myself, there was probably a day when I didn't always think like this about myself. There was a day that, sometimes when people see me like this, they all of a sudden get amazed. And I keep trying to tell people, just because I prefer a thing, don't mean I can't pull it. And here's the reason why I go through what it seems to be extremes. Because for 38 years, I've been on a journey trying to figure out and understand what does it really look like and sound like to truly be created in the image, wait for it, and likeness of God. You see, people believe when they read the creation story that it was all about just God framing dust, blowing into it, man becomes a living soul. And then they believe after that, when God deems that man should not be alone, that he takes a piece out of that man and fashions woman. That somehow the image and likeness part is only a physical or tangible representation of God. And what I've discovered is God always has a plan, always has a strategy, always has a blueprint, right? There's always a blueprint. So if we are created, made in the image and likeness, better word for likeness is essence of God, then that means that we look and we function like God. Y'all getting scared. Don't worry. Don't get scared. Image, that's appearance. Likeness is essence, inner workings, thought, function. So God said, I'm going to create a being that's going to live in an earth that I created, to do and to function the same way I do over everything. That's the game plan. I'm not just making earth. I need somebody to do what I do in said earth. No, I got everything under control, even the person or the entity I'm going to place here. But in order for this sphere, this thing, to function like I need it to function, I need somebody that's got what I got. So humanity is created. But somewhere between the creation of humanity and 2019, we forgot how sacred our actual nature is. And the reason I can say that is because, listen for it, how we treat one another, how we perceive one another, how we deal with other people that are created just like us. We have forgotten that we came from something perfect. God is the very essence of perfection. And we were literally drawn and created out of a perfected being to function in perfected like ways, in order that things would continue to what? Prosper. And here we are in 2019 debating about who can be saved or not. We debate about who can come to church or not. I'm talking in generalities. Don't worry. I ain't talking about none of y'all, so don't turn your faces up. Yeah, we all right. We debate about who we want to sit next to us. We debate about, are they really saved or not? We debate about, well, if they don't do this, they can't come to Jesus. We debate about so much stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with anything. And it proves once again that somewhere along the line we forgot where we came from. So my job as pastor, as preacher, as teacher, I want us to start to get a grip again on who it is that we are and examine the blueprint that we came from. Listen to the text. Then God said, let us, that's that triune talk, that's that royal talk, that royal we talk. Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let him have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, of the heavens, and over the livestock, over the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God made man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Let us make humanity in our image and after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea. So let us make humanity out of the best part of ourselves. And let humanity have dominion over authority over everything that is in the earth. So the key is humanity was never supposed to be subject to anything in the earth. It was never supposed to be controlled by anything in the earth. It was never supposed to be controlled by anything in the earth. Humanity was supposed to what? Keep everything in the earth in order. But what do we have now? We have people that are subject to everything in the earth and controlled by everything that the earth presents. Some people are not satisfied because they don't have enough money. They don't have enough this. They don't have enough that. They can't do this. They can't do that because they don't have enough of what the earth offers, when the reality is that's backwards. The blueprint says, I am supposed to be in control of the stuff that's in the earth. I am supposed to be able to what? Put things where they ought to be so that they what? Function as they ought to function, so that I can continue what it says later in the selected text, be fruitful, multiply, and what? Continue the same process. I am not supposed to be subject to the stuff and wait for it. My son, who is a part of what? Reproduction, should not be subject to the stuff. Everything should be what? Continuing. But what do? We fret over things. We continue to live in such a way that if something doesn't happen over here, all of a sudden life is over. If I don't have this, my life has ended. If I don't get the job of my dreams, stuff has ended. If I don't get the person of my dreams, who's going to want me? Okay, cool. I got your attention. There ain't going to be too much shouting. All these different things that begin to come up is because we have lost touch with the fact that we were created by a great God who gave us everything necessary, and all of it is sacred. So why wouldn't I get up this morning? And I'm using it as an example. Why wouldn't I get up this morning, look at myself in the mirror and say, that's a good looking man? When years ago, I could have seen the same thing, but I didn't always think about it. Because I began to what? Think about what other people thought. Come on with me. I ain't gonna shout, but there should be some shouting moments. Listen, there should be a moment when you look at yourself and you ought to be able to say, you know what, God made a good thing when God made me. And it's not arrogant. Because I know that what God has put in me is good. But if you can't get up and feel that way, there's possibly, the reason might be, is because we've allowed and we've been subject to a whole lot of stuff that tells us otherwise. So here's what I want you to do. If you get nothing else, get this. God made you exactly the way you needed to be. And your life is supposed to be a journey that only enhances the good that God has put in you. And it's supposed to be a journey that ultimately, because we have come into now a world that is sinful because of mess that happened in the past, your journey ought to come to a place where you understand that God never intended for you to be subject to the mess that you live in, but that when you're restored back to God, you're able to what? Live in such a way that you're like, you know what? This don't even faze me. You may need to grow into it because we're not functioning from the same place Adam and Eve functioned from. But eventually, you and I have to come to a place and say, you know what? I'm all right. Because God has made me all right. Because God has said I'm all right. Because Jesus did not die just for any old body. He died because he wanted me to be all right. He wanted me to be restored to a thing that was intended for me from the beginning. It's not just saving your soul, it is literally saving you from being subject to the wrong idea of who you were supposed to be. The blueprint has 3 things that you and I need, and I'm through. Here's the first thing. Here's the first thing you need to embrace. 1, when you understand the blueprint that God has laid out, which was literally designed off of the very essence of who God is, you get to a place where you can reclaim your God-given authority. You got to reclaim it. The Bible says God made humanity after what? God's image and likeness. And the purpose of it was to have what? Dominion, authority over all other created things. Not over created people, but created things. To keep stuff subject to where it's supposed to be so that it functions in a way that will maximize what? A better earth. That it will maximize and make it a better environment. My environment is actually subject to what I think and feel. Let me prove it. Let me prove it. Let me prove it. As a football fan, college football fan, this Saturday, Ohio State is going to probably play, well, I think they're playing Maryland, right? Maryland is garbage. They're garbage. Ohio State's good. So in my house when we watch the game, I'm going to sit in my recliner, I'm going to watch the game. If Ohio State does anything less than my expectations, they may win, but they may not blow them out. If they do anything less than my expectations, right, my disposition would be what? How did they let them? How was this even a game? And then all of a sudden, I become angry about something that has nothing to do with me. And then everybody in my house is subject to my anger about a game, which then means that my wife's miserable, my son's miserable. You see where I'm going? I have control over how I conduct myself in my environment. Just because you got fools on your job doesn't mean that you have to subject yourself to their foolishness. Just because you have people that come around you and talk crazy to you doesn't mean you got to invite the foolishness to you. You are such an individual created in the image and likeness of God that you ought to be able to say, you know what? Let's pause on that. I can't have that right now because that is not welcome in this space. They were given authority to what? Put stuff in its place. I know this sounds all simple, and some people are waiting for me to do all this extra, but no, some people need to hear this. Stop allowing folk into your space, ruining stuff because you know you can't react a certain way while they're there. You know that person get on your nerves. Don't call them. All right, cool. You know they're going to tell you the same old nonsense. Take their number out your phone And quit trying to call them thinking that they're going to do something different. You know that you can't be around certain type of people at certain times in your life because you don't want, look, okay, here we go. You going through something. You don't want to be around nosy people. Come on, let's just be, you know you can control that. You have been created to be like God so much that you can take authority over the environment you are in. You got to reclaim that. Second thing, from the blueprint, you got to get a new perspective on your purpose. The purpose of humanity, according to the text, was to be like God, but in the earth. That was the purpose. The purpose of humanity when it came to the earth was to be like God, but in the earth. We'll say it again. Be like God in the earth. That's according to the text. Now, wherever God has planted you in this life at this particular point in your life, you need to get an idea of what your purpose is in that space. Because what you think it might be, it may not be that at all. So it's kind of like this. When people who are willing to serve begin to serve in spaces that are not conducive to their gifts. Now, hear me out. It has nothing to do with your faithfulness to serve God. But it may be a pull and a strain on what God has really purposed for you to do. So I can do stuff on a computer. I know I'm tech savvy enough to be able to do certain things. But I am not going to attempt to build and create a website. That's not my deal. I can take pictures. I got a digital camera, a decent one. And every once in a while I like taking pictures. But I'm not going to be a photographer because that's not my passion. But 9 times out of 10, because I love to write, I'm going to write poetry. I'm going to write spoken word. I'm going to write books. I'm going to write journals. I'm going to write all that stuff because that is right up my alley. Because I can preach, because God allows me to, I use my voice not just in the pulpit, but wherever God allows me to go, because God has given me something that I can use. But if I find myself putting my energy into things that God has not purposed for me to do, then I will never be able to function and truly fulfill the purpose that is on my life. There are a lot of miserable people in the world, and it has nothing to do with them being angry about anything. It has everything to do with them not knowing what their purpose is. Some people are working jobs right now to survive, and their purpose feels like it's dying because they haven't investigated it. Is your purpose to be on a phone forever? No. I used to be on phones. I worked in a couple call centers. My purpose was not to be on the phone. You see, you got to investigate it. What makes your heart burn? What makes you get up in the morning? What could you do in this world that nobody had to pay you for and you would do it anyway? What is the thing that drives you? That's purpose. That's purpose. Church, what is our purpose? What? You thought I was just talking about us? No. What is your purpose? Is it to show up and exist, or is there something that what drives you? You got to get perspective on your purpose. And I'm finished with this last thing. I've told you I wasn't doing a whole lot today. Last thing is you gotta recognize the capacity you possess to replicate the process. You have a capacity to replicate the process. 28 says, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food, and to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the heavens. They're a green plant for food, and it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was. Listen to what God said. Now that I told you what you need to do and what your purpose here is, here's what I need you to do. Not only do it, but now what? Replicate it. Birth something that will what? Replicate the process. My name will live on in my son. Not just because I gave him my first and last name, but because the very fact that he is living means that there is another generation of Fergusons to come. And my job as his father is to teach him everything he needs to know about what? Life, purpose, destiny. So that when he arrives at a certain age and he has his own family and he makes me a grandfather, that the same thing will be what? Repeated in the next generation. Y'all catching it? So that means that my job is not just to teach him, but to make sure that I know what the heck I'm talking about. So that if I know what I'm really supposed to be when it comes to the things of God, I can teach him properly so that he doesn't look back and say, well, Dad, you really screwed this up. No. So that means I have to what? Be in a constant position of what? Learning about who God is every day. Because what I think I know about God is subject to change. Prove it. Okay. I'm not sick today, so I don't need him as a healer today. I know who he is when he's my savior because he saved my life. Cool. I know who God is because when I was broke, he was my provider. I know who God is when it comes to giving me joy when I was in sorrow. I know about him being my peace and my way maker when I was going through all kinds of chaos. I could tell my son about all those things. But thank God I've never been in a position where I had to be so messed up where I couldn't do anything that I needed God to come and perform a miracle. But the day may come. You may not be in certain positions where people can talk about all these different elements of God, but guess what? Someday you're going to run into it. You're going to run into a moment where you need God to be something that you never thought God would have to be for you. And then when God shows up like that, you'll be able to say as an authority, I know that the Lord. And then, here it is, you are now obligated to teach somebody about who God is to you. Churches don't die just because of a lack of method, you know. Churches die because we stop giving birth. Let me finish it this way. The moment you stop giving birth is the moment that certain things die. If nobody feels like they can actually talk about his goodness because nobody's talking about his goodness, then guess what? Stuff dies. But when you get in a place where people begin to talk about how good the Lord is and what the Lord has done and how many ways he's made, how many doors he's opened, and all that kind of stuff, there has to, at some point, something has to hit where somebody is able to say, you know what? I know the Lord will. I grew up hearing people say, I know the Lord will make a way. Oh, yes, he will. But then I stepped into a season where I learned about God will what? Fight all of my battles. And then my son's going to have to learn about the fact that God can what? Make a way out of no way. There has to be what? Something birthed. You got to replicate the process. But you can't wait on somebody to do it for you. You got something to offer. Plant the seed. You have something to offer somebody. Plant the seed. That is a part of your purpose. Plant the seed. Don't try to be anybody else. You're still growing too, but while you're growing still, what you got, plant the seed. So you can what? Start the process over again. Otherwise, you'll still have a generation of people that are walking around right now not having a clue about how wonderful they actually are. You are not the product of a mess. You are the product of a perfect blueprint. So stop treating yourself as less than when God has already stated by action and by word, you are not less than. You are more than enough. If you're here today and you don't know the Lord for yourself, today is the day to come. Today is your opportunity to come and say yes to the Lord. The Bible says if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God has raised that same Jesus from the dead, you will be saved. If you are in a spot where you need to find yourself planted in a place to grow, develop, and become more, no better place, no better time than right now. If you're here today, would you come?